What is the process? What are the steps? What happens? What is the time-based analysis of the process? What is going to occur? First, there is unadulterated confusion, delusion, falsehood, wrong views, speculation, propositional chaos. This comes from culture. It comes from the initial ability of the mind to delude itself. Then, a propositional point of view which contradicts the assumptions of that initial point of view is taken on consciously, deliberately, as a choice to understand where one's default way of conceiving has gone wrong. One takes on the point of view contrary to the default assumption. And then one starts to come to grips with what that might mean, what that might point to. What might it point to if my assumption that I can come to a conclusion about what is true and real and good for me? What if that's not true? What if there is no conclusion I can come to? What if I cannot settle on something which is true and which will allow me to attain some goal I have of, could be lots of things, could be feeling better, it could be being better. There is some assumption that I can arrive at knowing something about a problem I have, or knowing something about what is not right, what is right. These are questions that the mind believes it can answer in a form that can be held by the mind. But it's the wrong. It has a view that this truth is the kind of truth or knowledge that it's used to when it asks similar questions like, what is the problem with my car? Why does it make this sound? These types of questions that are based in time and space and outcome are not what this process is about. So that's stage 2. Stage 3 is another stage of delusion in which one has encountered the delusion itself and encountered a knowing which is not this type of knowing which seeks a conclusion. type of knowing that is just beyond the reach of the discriminating mind, the mind that sets things apart from each other, and the mind that anticipates and predicts and expects and looks for errors to correct. There's a knowing which shows up after maybe much pain of attempting to chase down this conclusion that the first two stages of delusion have assumed. And this knowing shows up, and it's not immediately recognizable. It's seen as something outside, or something special, or something mystical. This type of knowing is seen as connected to another world, a higher world, connected to some sort of purpose, some sort of emotion. This kind of knowing is conceived in many deluded ways, but the kernel of its reality cannot be forgotten once it is seen as the antidote to the other kind of searching. So in this third stage, the mind is wrestling with itself to get a grip on what it is to live and know and remember this type of knowing, this direct knowing, which it will still need words for and will still struggle to not try to come to a conclusion about. This stage is about finding the language that points out the delusion and the ways the delusion shows up, and the best description of that delusion. It's not going to be given. There's no conclusion, obviously, that can be given for this direct knowing, as it is not a conclusion. Truth doesn't end, doesn't begin or end. It's not time-based. And so the way that the delusion is constructed gets deconstructed by the mind that wants to discriminate and pick apart and to propose solutions, and all the ways it can conceive of to point itself away from its tendency to want to conclude and to anticipate and to fix things. Start to reflect off of the surface of the real truth, the real knowing. Not that delusion isn't truth, it's part of truth, but it's not the goal of the process just to stay deluded or distracted from the self-evident nature. And really the process becomes about includes the delusion within the direct contact with a knowing which does not assume a concluded state of affairs and a concluded truth, quote unquote, a truth that is propositional or procedural even. It's a process in which the language starts to break down to some extent, and some people may seek better language. Some people may think they've got the language. They are just going to use what makes sense to them in their propositional mind, and they're going to proclaim their knowledge on the subject because they just invented a way to talk about it. Now, the process I'm talking about has been described in many, many ways. And obviously, I can only describe it with the language that I have acquired, because I'm not speaking a language that you don't understand. These are all words that you have a place for in your head if you speak this language, which is English, just to be clear. But I would proclaim that there is no better language than what was used and is currently used by some people who are described as Theravadan Buddhists who read what the Buddha said as remembered by Ananda, his number one disciple. And so when I talk about the process, I'm talking about something that is not as much clouded by mythology or metaphor, although I think many learned scholars would agree that language is always metaphorical, even when it does its best attempt at being literal. So if I say that there is truth that is not time-based, that is impersonal, and which cannot be known by the part of the mind that understands language, and which the part of the mind that understands language will always try to get around and find a workaround for, because it simply cannot conceive of it. And that this knowing is really to be known and to be cultivated in the mind. But here's where it gets a little tricky. One can think of the mind as two minds, or think of the ways of knowing as multiple. And so once that is understood, that delusion which is going on, which one is recognized, and which one is working with in language, and working with in practices to decloud this mind, and to let this mind settle, and to let this mind see that it is part of something bigger, and that the things it represents to itself are not the only things available to the whole, to the being which knows. This process works with both the delusion and the direct knowing of the truth of the reality of delusion and of freedom from delusion. And that is what the process is. It is a working out of that activity of choosing to be deluded. Ultimately, it's coming down to you are the one that is choosing to delude this being. You are a being that chooses or does not choose to delude itself, to ignore the self-evident truth of what is the nature of reality. And one way to put what that nature is that nature is unpredictable. It is uncertain. And that uncertainty can never be satisfactory to a mind that wants to conclude things, that wants to know in a way that is set and stable. That's one way to describe what the truth is. But the truth is often used in a way which has nothing to do with this type of truth. Truth is almost always characterized as something that one can conclude and be done with and actually write in stone. Well, some people wrote things in stone, but then other people came along and said, guess what? It's not like that. It's somewhere else. It's written somewhere else. If you want to write it down, it's written somewhere else.